Welcome back to Book Summaries channel. Have you ever wondered why you make irrational decisions even when you think you're being logical? Today we're breaking down Daniel Kahneman's Thinking, Fast and Slow, a masterclass in behavioral economics that reveals the hidden systems controlling your mind. The book begins by introducing two fictional characters that represent our cognitive processes, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional, operating automatically with almost no effort or voluntary control. It's the part of your brain that detects hostility in a voice or completes the phrase bread and instantly. System 2, on the other hand, is slower, more deliberative, and logical, requiring conscious effort and attention. It handles complex calculations like 17 times 24 or filling out a tax form. Kahneman explains that while we think of ourselves as System 2, the rational, conscious self, we are actually mostly driven by System 1. System 1 constantly generates suggestions for System 2 in the form of impressions, intuitions, and feelings. If endorsed by System 2, these become beliefs and actions. When System 1 runs into difficulty, it calls on System 2 to support more detailed and specific processing. However, System 2 is lazy and often accepts the easy answers provided by System 1. This division of labor is efficient but leads to systematic errors in judgment. This chapter explores the physical and mental demands of System 2 and why it remains so lazy. Thinking deeply is hard work that consumes actual metabolic energy, which is why our pupils dilate and our heart rate increases during complex tasks. Because mental resources are limited, System 2 must prioritize where it allocates attention. If you are walking and asked to calculate a difficult math problem, you will likely stop walking to focus. System 1 can handle multiple tasks at once, like walking and talking, but System 2 cannot. When System 2 is busy, System 1 has more influence, making us more likely to yield to temptations or make biased choices. Kahneman introduces the law of least effort, stating that the brain will gravitate toward the path of least resistance. We avoid mental strain whenever possible to preserve energy for survival. This explains why we often fall for simple illusions or fail to notice obvious changes when we are focused on something else. Mastery of a task allows System 2 to step back as the skill becomes automatic for System 1. Kahneman discusses the relationship between self-control and cognitive effort, noting that they share the same limited pool of resources. When you use your will to resist a temptation, you have less energy left to solve a logic puzzle, a state known as ego depletion. This suggests that being busy or tired makes us more likely to act on impulses or accept superficial arguments. System 2 is responsible for monitoring the impulses of System 1, but it often fails to do so effectively. For example, people who are given a difficult cognitive task are more likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit salad afterward. Intelligence is not just about processing power. It is also about the ability to engage System 2 and resist the shortcuts of System 1. The chapter emphasizes that many people go through life without questioning their intuitive responses, leading to errors that could have been avoided with a bit of mental friction. Training the mind to stay focused is as much about character as it is about IQ. Ultimately, those who are more engaged are better at avoiding the pitfalls of automatic thinking. System 1 functions like a massive network of associations, linking ideas, memories, and emotions together seamlessly. Kahneman introduces priming, showing how exposure to one idea can subconsciously influence our response to another. For instance, seeing the word eat makes you more likely to complete the word fragment SO_P as soup rather than soap. These effects are not just mental. They can be physical, as demonstrated by studies where thinking about old age makes people walk more slowly. This ideomotor effect proves that our environment is constantly shaping our behavior without our conscious awareness. We are not as much the masters of our actions as we like to believe. Priming can affect our honesty, our social interactions, and even our political votes. These associations happen automatically and are part of how System 1 creates a coherent world. Because these links are hidden from us, we often invent rational-sounding reasons for our behavior after the fact. Our mind is essentially a machine for finding connections, even where none exist. Cognitive ease is the range of feelings we experience when things are going smoothly and no extra effort is required from System 2. When we are in a state of ease, we are likely to be in a good mood, trust our intuitions, and believe what we are told. Factors like clear font, repetition, and rhyming phrases can induce this state, making information feel true regardless of its actual validity. This is why advertising and propaganda are so effective. Familiarity is often confused with truth. On the other hand, cognitive strain occurs when things are difficult to read or understand, which activates System 2. While strain makes us more vigilant and less likely to make intuitive errors, it also makes us less creative and more uncomfortable. Kahneman suggests that if you want people to believe your message, you should make it as easy to process as possible. The illusion of truth is a dangerous byproduct of System 1's preference for simplicity. We are naturally biased toward believing what is easy to understand. True critical thinking requires moving beyond the comfort of cognitive ease. System 1 is designed to maintain and update a model of what is normal in your world. It allows you to navigate life by predicting what should happen next and alerting you when a surprise occurs. When an event happens twice, System 1 quickly accepts it as a new norm, reducing the surprise. Our brains are also hardwired to seek causality in everything, often attributing intention to random events. We struggle to understand statistics and randomness because System 1 demands a story with a clear cause and effect. This leads to the illusion of understanding, where we believe we know why things happened when they were actually just accidents. We see patterns in the stock market or sports streaks that are often just noise. Kahneman points out that our survival once depended on identifying agents and causes quickly, so we are naturally suspicious of coincidence. This chapter teaches us that our intuition is a poor guide for understanding the laws of probability. We must learn to accept that some things happen for no reason at all. System 1 is described as a machine for jumping to conclusions, which is beneficial when the conclusion is likely to be correct and the cost of an error is low. However, it becomes dangerous when the situation is complex and the stakes are high. One of the most important concepts introduced here is WSITI. What you see is all there is. System 1 builds a coherent story based on the limited information available and ignores what it doesn't know. It does not account for the quality or quantity of the evidence. It only cares about the consistency of the narrative. This leads to overconfidence and the halo effect, where we assume a person is good at everything just because we like one thing about them. System 1 is also biased toward belief rather than doubt, as doubting requires the active participation of System 2. We often make quick judgments about people or situations based on thin slices of data. This chapter highlights the need to slow down and ask what information is missing. Our confidence in our beliefs is often unrelated to how much we actually know. Kahneman explains that System 1 is constantly performing basic assessments of the world around us. It automatically judges things like how dangerous a face looks or how much we should like a particular object. We are also prone to intensity matching, where we compare things across different scales, like matching the severity of a crime to a certain color. This chapter introduces substitution, a key mechanism where System 1 replaces a difficult question with an easier one. For example, instead of answering, "How happy am I with my life?" we answer, "What is my mood right now?" This happens without System 2 noticing the switch. Because System 1 is always active, it creates a mental shotgun effect, computing far more information than is necessary for the task at hand. These irrelevant computations often leak into our final judgments, skewing our logic. We are rarely aware of the true origin of our opinions. Understanding this process helps us see why our first impressions are so powerful yet often flawed. Building on the previous chapter, Kahneman dives deeper into the heuristics, or mental shortcuts, used by System 1. A heuristic is a simple procedure that helps find adequate, though often imperfect, answers to difficult questions. If you are asked how likely a company is to succeed, you might intuitively answer based on how much you like their logo or their CEO. This substitution allows us to navigate a complex world without constant mental exhaustion. However, it also means our rational decisions are often based on irrelevant emotions. The effect heuristic is particularly powerful, where our likes and dislikes determine what we believe to be true about the world. If you like a technology, you will see its benefits as high and its risks as low. System 2 usually acts as an apologist for System 1 rather than a critic, finding reasons to support the intuitive conclusions we've already reached. This chapter warns that our feelings often dictate our logic. True objectivity is nearly impossible because our gut always gets the first word. Kahneman addresses our poor grasp of statistics, specifically our tendency to believe that small samples represent the larger population. This law of small numbers leads to many errors in scientific research and everyday life. We are quick to find patterns in data that are actually just the result of random chance. For example, a small hospital might show a higher rate of a certain disease, but it's often just because the sample size is too small to be stable. System 1 doesn't understand sample size. It only sees a story that needs an explanation. We are prone to the gambler's fallacy, believing that if a coin flips heads 5 times, tails is due to happen. In reality, each flip is independent. This chapter emphasizes that humans are essentially anti-statistical by nature. We prefer a good story over a mathematical truth. To avoid these errors, we must learn to trust formulas and large-scale data over our own intuition. Randomness is much more common than we realize. Anchoring is a psychological phenomenon where an initial, even irrelevant, number influences our subsequent estimates. If you are asked if Gandhi was older than 114 when he died, your guess will be higher than if you were asked if he was older than 35. Anchoring happens in 2 ways: as an adjustment by System 2 and as a priming effect by System 1. It is a powerful tool in negotiations. The person who makes the first offer sets the anchor for the entire discussion. We are often unaware of how much these numbers pull us in one direction. Even experts, like real estate agents or judges, are susceptible to anchoring bias. This effect is used in stores when they show a suggested retail price next to a sale price. To resist an anchor, you must actively search for reasons why the number might be wrong. This chapter demonstrates how easily our internal scale of value can be manipulated. We lack a fixed sense of what things are worth. The availability heuristic is the process of judging the frequency or probability of an event by how easily instances come to mind. If you can easily recall a news report about a plane crash, you will believe flying is more dangerous than it actually is. System 1 uses ease of retrieval as a shortcut for frequency. This leads to biased judgments based on the vividness of a memory or how recently an event occurred. People often overestimate their own contribution to a project because their own efforts are more available to their memory than the efforts of others. This heuristic can create availability cascades, where a small risk becomes a public panic because it is repeated so often in the media. Our fears are often disproportionate to actual threats. We worry about shark attacks but ignore the dangers of heart disease. Understanding this bias helps us realize that our gut feeling about risk is often just a reflection of recent news headlines. We should look at actual data rather than how scared we feel. Building on the availability heuristic, Kahneman explores how emotions shape our perception of risk. He introduces the effect heuristic, where people use their feelings to judge the safety or benefit of something. We are not good at thinking about probability. We either ignore it or overweight it based on how emotional the topic is. Public policy is often driven by availability cascades, cycles of public alarm fueled by media coverage, rather than objective risk assessment. This leads to a misallocation of resources, where governments spend millions on minor but terrifying risks while ignoring major but boring ones. Kahneman argues that our intuition is not equipped to handle the complexities of a modern, globalized world. Experts are often at odds with the public because experts use data while the public uses availability and emotion. This chapter calls for a more rational approach to risk management. We must learn to distinguish between what is truly dangerous and what is just noisy. Balancing our emotions with statistics is vital for a functional society. This chapter introduces representativeness, another heuristic where we judge the probability of an event based on how much it resembles a stereotype. Kahneman uses the famous Tom W. experiment to show that people ignore base rates, the actual statistical frequency of a group, in favor of descriptive details. Even when we know that there are far more humanities students than computer science students, we will guess Tom is in computer science if he is described as nerdy. This is a mistake because a highly specific description is always less likely than a broad one. We are more interested in similarity than in probability. This bias leads us to make incorrect predictions about people's careers, health, and behavior based on surface-level traits. System 1 loves to categorize and ignores the math. To fight this, we should always start with the base rate and then adjust based on evidence. We must be wary of vivid descriptions that distract us from the underlying facts. Statistics should always come before stereotypes. The Linda problem is one of the most famous examples of the conjunction fallacy. Participants are told about Linda, a former activist, and asked whether it is more likely that she is a bank teller or a bank teller inactive in the feminist movement. Statistically, the first option must be more likely because it is a broader category, yet most people choose the second. This is because the second option is more representative of the description provided. System 1 is attracted to plausibility and coherence over logic. This chapter demonstrates that adding detail can make a story seem more likely even though it mathematically makes it less probable. We are easily fooled by narrative over data. This less is more effect shows that we value the quality of a story more than its logical structure. Even when the error is pointed out, the intuitive pull remains strong. It is a stark reminder of how easily our brains can be led astray by a good description. We must learn to look for the simplest explanation. Humans have a strong preference for causal information over statistical information. We find it much easier to learn from a specific story about an individual than from data about a group. Kahneman uses the green and blue cab problem to show that people ignore base rates unless they are given a causal reason to believe them. For example, telling someone that 85% of cabs are green is often ignored, but saying green cab drivers are more reckless is taken seriously. We struggle to integrate abstract facts into our decision-making. This explains why stereotypes are so persistent. They provide a causal link that System 1 can easily digest. This chapter also discusses how we underestimate the power of social situations to influence behavior, preferring to blame a person's character instead. We are storytelling animals who live in a world of agents and intentions. To become more rational, we must force ourselves to pay attention to the dry statistics that we naturally want to ignore. Data is often the true cause, even if it's not a good story. Regression to the mean is a statistical phenomenon where extreme performances are followed by more average ones. Kahneman explains that because we are hardwired to find causes for everything, we completely misunderstand this concept. He tells the story of flight instructors who believe that praising a student after a great landing caused the next one to be worse. In reality, the students simply regressed to their average performance after an exceptionally good day. We often misattribute the effects of luck to our own actions, such as punishment or reward. This leads to the illusion of skill and bad management practices. If you perform exceptionally well today, you will likely perform worse tomorrow, not because you lost your edge, but because that's how probability works. Understanding regression helps us see that we are often praising or blaming people for things that are out of their control. It is one of the most counterintuitive yet important concepts in the book. Life is a series of fluctuations around a mean. We often make intuitive predictions that are far too extreme and based on very little evidence. This chapter discusses how System 1 jumps from a small piece of information to a confident forecast. For example, if a child reads early, we might intuitively predict they will be a successful CEO, ignoring the many years and variables in between. These non-regressive predictions happen because System 1 uses intensity matching, substituting how impressive is this kid for how successful will he be. Kahneman suggests a four-step process to tame these predictions by adjusting them toward the mean. We should start with a baseline prediction and only move away from it if we have high-quality evidence. This disciplined approach requires System 2 to override our natural gut feelings. Most of our intuitive forecasts are overconfident and statistically unsound. By cooling our enthusiasm with a bit of math, we can make much more accurate assessments of the future. Humility is a key part of rational prediction. The narrative fallacy is our tendency to create simple, coherent stories out of complex, random events. We look at the past and believe it was predictable, ignoring the role of luck and the fact that thousands of other outcomes were possible. This hindsight bias makes us believe we knew it all along after something happens, which distorts our ability to learn from experience. We judge decision-makers based on the outcome of their choice rather than the quality of the decision at the time it was made. If a risky bet pays off, we call the leader a visionary. If it fails, we call them reckless. This illusion of understanding gives us a false sense of security in a chaotic world. We crave the feeling that life is orderly and that success is guaranteed by following a specific formula. Kahneman argues that we must accept the radical uncertainty of our existence. The past is much more accidental than our history books suggest. We should be more forgiving of errors and more skeptical of success stories. This chapter examines the illusion of validity, where our confidence in our judgments is not based on their accuracy, but on the coherence of the story we've created. Kahneman shares his own experience in the Israeli army, where he realized that his predictions about soldier performance were no better than chance, yet he continued to feel confident in them. This cognitive illusion persists even when we are presented with proof of our failure. Experts in fields like finance and politics are particularly prone to this, believing their specialized knowledge gives them predictive power. In reality, many of these fields are low-validity environments where the future is essentially random. The illusion of skill keeps people trading stocks and making bold geopolitical forecasts despite poor track records. Confidence is a feeling, not a metric of truth. We should trust experts less when they are making long-term predictions about complex systems. Real expertise requires a high-validity environment with immediate feedback. One of the most controversial findings in the book is that simple formulas almost always outperform human expert judgment. Whether it's predicting wine quality, medical outcomes, or employee success, algorithms based on a few variables are more consistent than people. This is because humans are inconsistent. We are influenced by our mood, our hunger, and irrelevant information. We try to be clever by adding complexity, but this usually just adds noise. Formulas don't have bad days or gut feelings. Kahneman suggests that for many important tasks, like hiring, We should use a checklist of objective criteria rather than relying on an interview. We resist this because we feel that human judgment is nuanced and superior, but the data says otherwise. Giving up control to a formula feels robotic, but it leads to better outcomes. This chapter is a call for algorithmic thinking in professional life. We should use tools that protect us from our own cognitive inconsistencies. Kahneman teams up with a critic, Gary Klein, to determine when intuition is actually reliable. They conclude that expert intuition is only valid if two conditions are met. The environment must be sufficiently regular to be predictable, and the expert must have had a lot of practice with immediate feedback. Firefighters, chess players, and nurses often have valid intuition because they operate in high-validity environments. In contrast, stock pickers and political pundits do not because their worlds are too chaotic and feedback is delayed. In these cases, intuition is just system one jumping to a conclusion without a valid basis. You should be skeptical of experts who claim to have a gut feeling about a complex, unpredictable future. True expertise is built through thousands of hours of deliberate practice where the rules of the game don't change. If the environment is wicked or irregular, intuition is likely to be a trap. Knowing when to trust your gut is as important as trusting it. The planning fallacy is our tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks of our own projects while overestimating the benefits. We usually take the inside view, focusing on the specific details of our plan and assuming everything will go as expected. Kahneman argues that we should instead take the outside view, looking at the statistics of similar projects completed by others. For example, if most people take 5 years to write a book, you should probably assume you will too, regardless of how fast you think you can work. This reference class forecasting is a powerful way to avoid over-optimism. We ignore the outside view because it feels impersonal and doesn't account for our unique brilliance. However, the statistics of others are the most accurate predictor of our own success. The planning fallacy leads to abandoned projects and massive budget overruns. Taking the outside view is a necessary reality check for any ambitious goal. Optimism is described as the engine of capitalism. Most entrepreneurs and leaders are naturally optimistic, which drives them to take risks that more rational people would avoid. While this optimism is great for society, leading to innovation and growth, it is often disastrous for the individuals involved. Small businesses fail at high rates because owners overestimate their chances of success and ignore the competition. This optimistic bias is both a blessing and a curse. It keeps us moving forward but makes us blind to real dangers. Kahneman introduces the pre-mortem technique to combat this. Imagine you are 1 year in the future and your project has failed miserably. Then write the history of that failure. This forces System 2 to look for threats that the optimistic System 1 would otherwise suppress. We need optimists to build the world, but we need defensive pessimism to keep our projects on track. Balancing hope with a cold look at the odds is the secret to lasting success. Kahneman challenges the classical economic theory that people make decisions based on utility, the objective value of wealth. He points out that this theory ignores the starting point, or reference point, of the individual. For a person with $1 million, losing $500 feels very different than for someone with only $1,000. Utility theory assumes we are all perfectly rational econs, but Kahneman shows we are humans influenced by our current state. This chapter lays the groundwork for prospect theory, showing that our choices are driven by changes in wealth rather than absolute states of wealth. We are more concerned with gains and losses relative to where we are now. Bernoulli's model failed to account for loss aversion. The fact that losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good. This shift in perspective changed the field of economics forever. We must understand the psychology of the decision maker to understand their choices. Value is subjective and highly dependent on context. Prospect theory is the crown jewel of Kahneman's work, explaining how people actually choose between risky options. It has three core features: the reference point, the principle of diminishing sensitivity, and loss aversion. We evaluate outcomes relative to a neutral point, such as our current bank balance. Diminishing sensitivity means that the difference between $10 and $20 feels larger than the difference between $1,010 and $1,020. Most importantly, losses loom larger than gains. For most people, the pain of a loss is about twice as powerful as the joy of an equivalent gain. This leads to risk aversion when we face potential gains and risk-seeking when we face certain losses, trying to double down to get back to even. Prospect theory explains why we hold onto losing stocks too long and sell winning ones too early. We are wired to protect what we have more than we are to get more. This evolutionary trait kept our ancestors alive, but leads to irrational financial choices today. We must recognize our fear of loss to make better bets. The endowment effect is the tendency to value something more simply because we own it. In a famous study, students who were given a mug wanted significantly more money to sell it than those who didn't have a mug were willing to pay for it. Ownership creates a new reference point, and giving the item up feels like a loss, which triggers loss aversion. This effect doesn't apply to routine commerce, like a merchant selling bread, but it deeply affects things with personal or emotional value. It explains why we struggle to declutter our homes, or why homeowners overprice their houses. We become attached to our current state of affairs and resist change, even if it's beneficial. This status quo bias keeps us in jobs and relationships long after they've stopped serving us. To overcome this, we should try to view our possessions from the perspective of someone who doesn't own them. Asking, "What would I pay for this if I didn't have it?" can provide a much-needed reality check. Negative events and information have a much stronger impact on our brains than positive ones. This is why a single harsh word can ruin a whole day of praise, and why loss aversion is so powerful in our decision-making. Evolutionarily, it was more important to notice a predator than a food source. Our brains are hardwired to prioritize threat detection. This explains why negative political campaigning is so effective and why we are so sensitive to social rejection. In relationships, it takes many positive interactions to overcome one negative one. Kahneman discusses how we are more motivated to avoid a bad outcome than to achieve a good one. This can lead to goal-setting traps where we stop working as soon as we reach a target to avoid the loss of failing it. We are essentially defensive creatures. Recognizing this negativity bias can help us manage our emotions and our reactions to the news. We must work harder to appreciate the good because the bad takes care of itself. Kahneman presents a matrix showing how we respond to risks and rewards at different levels of probability. First, we overweight small probabilities, the possibility effect, which is why people buy lottery tickets or insurance for unlikely events. Second, we underweight high probabilities, the certainty effect, making us fearful when success is almost guaranteed but not quite certain. This leads to a fourfold pattern. We are risk-averse for high-probability gains, taking a sure thing over a gamble, and risk-seeking for high-probability losses, gambling to avoid a certain loss. Conversely, we are risk-seeking for low-probability gains, lotteries, and risk-averse for low-probability losses, insurance. This explains why people settle lawsuits for less than they are worth, or why they take desperate gambles when they are already losing. Our brains don't treat all percentages equally. We are suckers for hope and fear. Understanding this pattern is essential for anyone dealing with law, finance, or strategic planning. This chapter focuses on our obsession with rare events, like terrorist attacks or rare diseases. Because of the possibility effect, we give these events far more weight than their statistical probability deserves. We are particularly influenced by vivid descriptions and images, which activates System 1. If we can easily imagine a disaster, we believe it is likely to happen. Kahneman notes that we often oscillate between completely ignoring a rare risk and being completely obsessed by it. There is no middle ground in our intuition. This is why dread risks get so much funding and attention compared to routine risks. We are also prone to denominator neglect, where we focus on the number of times an event happens, e.g., 10 people died, rather than the total number of chances out of 10 million. To stay rational, we must force ourselves to look at the actual percentages. Don't let a vivid story override your knowledge of the odds. The rarest events are usually the ones we worry about the most. We often make decisions one at a time, narrow framing, rather than looking at the big picture, broad framing. Narrow framing makes us risk-averse because we focus on the pain of a single potential loss. Kahneman argues that we should adopt a risk policy, a broad frame where we accept a series of small, independent gambles knowing that we will win over the long run. If you always take the sure thing in small decisions, you will end up much poorer over your lifetime. For example, you should usually decline extended warranties because, statistically, they are a bad bet. By viewing life as a portfolio of risks, you can reduce the emotional impact of any single loss. This requires the discipline of System 2 to override the loss aversion of System 1. A broad frame allows you to be more adventurous and rational. We should win some and lose some rather than trying to never lose. Rationality is a long-term game. We use mental accounting to organize our lives, treating money in different buckets, e.g., vacation fund, grocery money, as if it has different values. This is irrational because money is fungible. A famous example is the disposition effect, where investors sell stocks that have gone up to lock in a win, but keep stocks that have gone down to avoid a loss. This is a mistake. You should sell the stock that is less likely to perform well in the future, regardless of its past. We also suffer from the sunk cost fallacy, where we continue to invest in a failing project or a bad relationship just because we've already spent so much on it. This is keeping score with our ego rather than our bank account. We hate the feeling of closing a bucket at a loss. To make better choices, we must realize that the past is gone and only the future costs and benefits matter. Don't let your mental accounts prevent you from making the most logical move today. Our preferences can change depending on whether we evaluate options separately or together, a phenomenon called preference reversal. When we look at a single case, we use System 1 and focus on its emotional appeal. When we compare two cases side by side, joint evaluation, System 2 is activated and we become more logical. For example, people might donate more to a single cute animal than to a fund for a whole ecosystem. But when they see both, they realize the ecosystem is more important. Our moral judgments are often inconsistent because they are based on these narrow frames. Kahneman suggests that joint evaluation is always superior because it provides context and forces us to be more consistent. This has huge implications for the legal system and how we set fines or punishments. We should always ask, what else can I compare this to, before making a final judgment? Consistency requires a broad perspective. Isolation is the enemy of logic. The way a problem is described or framed can completely change our choice, even if the underlying facts are the same. This is framing effects. For instance, a surgery with a 90% survival rate sounds much better than one with a 10% mortality rate. People are risk-averse when a problem is framed in terms of gains and risk-seeking when it is framed in terms of losses. This proves that we are not truly rational because our preferences are not description-independent. We are sensitive to the emotional tags that words carry. Marketers and politicians use framing to nudge us towards certain behaviors without us noticing. To be truly rational, you must try to reframe every important decision in its opposite terms to see if your choice stays the same. If it doesn't, You are being manipulated by your own System 1. Our sense of reality is often just a byproduct of how information is presented to us. Words matter more than we think. Kahneman introduces the distinction between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives in the moment. Does it hurt now? While the remembering self keeps score and tells the story of our lives. How was it overall? Surprisingly, our decisions are almost entirely driven by the remembering self. We don't choose between experiences. We choose between memories of experiences. The remembering self is subject to the peak-end rule. We judge an event by its most intense moment and how it ended, rather than its total duration. This means a long, pleasant vacation can be ruined by a bad flight home in our memory. We also suffer from duration neglect, where the actual time spent in pain or pleasure doesn't matter as much as the story. This explains why we often do things that don't make us happy in the moment, but make for good stories later. We are storytelling animals who live for our memories. True happiness requires a balance between enjoying the now and building a past we are proud of. Building on the two selves, this chapter explores how we view our entire lives as narratives. The remembering self is a storyteller that prioritizes significant moments and endings over everything else. We would choose a life with a happy ending over a slightly better life that ends on a down note. This focusing illusion means that when we think about a specific factor, like money or health, we overestimate its impact on our overall happiness. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. This explains why we think moving to California will make us much happier. We focus on the sun and forget about the daily traffic and bills that remain the same. Our stories are often built on a few vivid details while ignoring the reality of our day-to-day experience. To improve your life, you should focus on how you spend your time every day, not just on the big achievements that the remembering self craves. We should live for the experience, not just for the memory. Kahneman investigates what actually makes us happy on a day-to-day basis. He finds that experienced well-being, the mood of the experiencing self, is heavily influenced by things like health, social interaction, and freedom from pain. Interestingly, once people reach a certain level of income, more money does not increase daily happiness, though it does increase life satisfaction, the remembering self score. Being poor makes everything else worse, but being rich doesn't necessarily make lunch taste better. The most important factor for daily happiness is time spent with people we like. We often trade away our happiness for status or wealth because the remembering self is in charge of our goals. This chapter suggests that we should pay more attention to our daily time use if we want to be truly happy. Avoid long commutes and spend more time socializing. Our intuition about what will make us happy is often wrong because it's based on a flawed storytelling self. Focus on the now to boost your well-being. The book concludes by examining the focusing illusion once more. We often make huge life changes based on a single idea that we believe will transform our happiness. However, we quickly adapt to new circumstances, a process called hedonic adaptation. The new car or house soon becomes part of the background of our lives, and our happiness returns to its baseline. Only things that we continue to pay attention to, like a bad commute or a hobby we love, have a lasting impact. Kahneman summarizes the lessons of the book by encouraging us to recognize the limitations of both System 1 and System 2. We can't simply think our way out of biases, but we can build systems and environments that protect us from them. Organizations can be more rational than individuals if they use checklists and broad framing. The journey to a better life is not about having perfect intuition, but about slowing down when the stakes are high. By understanding the characters of our mind, we can navigate the world with a bit more wisdom and a lot less overconfidence.